Holding, MP South St. Andrew, and Leader of the Opposition. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Parliament, let's make welcome to his feet the Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. It is with a sense of honor and humility that I rise today to make my third contribution to this budget debate in my current capacity as Leader of the Opposition. Returning to this House each year for the past 3 years as Leader of the Opposition solidifies my commitment to the people of Jamaica. I give thanks to Almighty God for all his blessings and for the strength, wisdom, and courage to continue to serve the people of Jamaica on the journey of national development. I invoke words from Psalm 46, verse 1. God is our refuge and strength. As I commit to stand up for and stand with the Jamaican people. Every year, Madam Speaker, this occasion reminds me that this journey of representation is not one that is taken alone. My wife, my forever shining star, Sandra, stands by my side and in my support, and I hail her today. Our 3 children and the new delight of our lives, our first grandchild, stand as a reminder of the sense of family that is so important to national development. This occasion also reaffirms the great privilege it is for me to represent the constituents of South St. Andrew. Without whom I would not be here. I thank them and I thank the members of our constituency executive, many of whom are here today, for the great work they do in service to the people of South St. Andrew. And at this point, I'd like to say a special word of congratulations and thanks to 2 wonderful ladies, Sarah Marshall and Louise Newland. They have been the CDF officer and secretary for the constituency, and they provide amazing, dedicated support to the work of their Member of Parliament. On the 26th of February, 2024, they were both elected councillors for the Trenchtown at Admiral Town Division. And Madam Speaker, they did so with great distinction as they came first and third in voter support out of the entire 228 councillors across Jamaica in the recent local government election. Respect you. Once again, as party leader, I pay tribute to the team of patriots, my comrades in the People's National Party, who are dedicated to the defense of the interests of the people of Jamaica and building a better future for all our people. I wish to express my profound gratitude for your support. I also wish to thank my colleague, members of Parliament, on both sides of this House for another vibrant year of engagement. Let us continue to relate with civility in this House, guided by a shared desire to serve our nation. I also wish to thank the clerk and her team of staff here in Gordon House who work steadfastly to support what we do in the nation's parliament. And Madam Speaker, I particularly want to thank the members on this side for their support, their solidarity, and their guidance along our shared journey. Though only 14 out of 63 at this time, we little, but we talawa. To our senators and other members of the shadow cabinet and their deputies and their juniors, I acknowledge and thank you for your service and contribution. I've put together an amazing team of young and experienced Jamaicans, representative across a range of demographics and professions, who are focused on the policies and programs that will improve the quality of life of the Jamaican people. Madam Speaker, for the past many months, I've been along the highways and byways of Jamaica. I wish to express my respect and thanks to the team of people within the People's National Party and the Office of the Leader of the Opposition who have supported me in this effort. Jamaica has just completed local government elections, and I want to thank all the voters who came out and exercised their franchise in support of our democratic system of governance. Madam Speaker, it is noteworthy and significant that for all the talk about voter apathy, the total votes cast in this election increased by over 81,000 persons, or 15%, in excess of the total votes that were cast in the 2016 local government elections, moving up from 545,571 voters in 2016 to 626,934 voters in 2024. An increase, as I've said, of 15%. Indeed, until we comprehensively clean up the voters list by a long overdue re-verification exercise, we will continue to underrate and denigrate the vibrancy of our democracy with this prevailing narrative about voter participation. Madam Speaker, I want to congratulate all the mayors and all the other councillors island-wide on both sides of our political system who were successful in the recent elections. And I acknowledge those who were not elected for their courage and commitment in putting themselves forward. I wish to especially thank the majority of elected councillors who come from the People's National Party for their hard work, resilience, and enthusiasm on the very long road that led to these elections. I also want to use this opportunity to assure them that their work has only just begun, and that what we are expecting is a high level of representation, accountability, and transparency in their conduct of the people's business. Similarly, the mayors in the 7 local authorities now under the jurisdiction of our party have their marching orders. We published a strong and forward-thinking manifesto, and I expect them to ensure that these commitments are kept, especially those that are possible of implementation prior to us assuming government, and to start the implementation right away. And we are happy to share our ideas with the other 7 mayors as we want to see good governance and even development in the local authorities right across the country. And finally, Madam Speaker, all the people of Jamaica who showed us that you are ready again to listen to what we have to offer, who demonstrated a growing belief that better must come, who came out and provided a popular majority in support of our party. We thank you for your expression of confidence in us, and we look forward to engaging you further in the year to come. We not only listened, but we have learned. I learned that we have a very aware and astute electorate who have come to see this government for what it is, Some are still cautious, but most are resolved. Who feels it knows it. The people of Jamaica want change. Madam Speaker, today I will remind Jamaicans of some of the context in which this budget for the coming fiscal year, 2024-25, has been crafted. I will then address some real challenges that we found in the budget as presented, and then I'm going to provide you with some of the concrete plans that we will implement when we come to service as Government of Jamaica. I do this knowing that Jamaicans have seen the light. They know that we will be coming back to implement our plans. The people of Jamaica know that there's one thing about ideas. They are best implemented by the people who come up with them. It is time for change, and that is where we are going. We are on the road to change. Madam Speaker, I sat through the 4.5-hour presentation of the Finance Minister, and I am more convinced than ever that this government does not have any intention of tackling the fundamental challenges facing our country. With them, Jamaica will continue along its current path, and the frustrations and hopelessness of the majority of our people will continue to grow. The 2024-25 budget is yet another tinkering budget, not grounded in a vision of development for the Jamaican people. According to their economic model, something will trickle down to the farmer, the teacher, the nurse, the sanitation worker, the hairdresser, and the taxi man. After 8 years, they want Jamaicans to wait even longer for the trickle that might come. Much of what was presented we have heard before. The 6-story hospital at the University of the West Indies was first announced in 2015 by Fenton Ferguson. The Minister of Finance seems to have found the plan in 2020, and it was re-announced. The Jam World and Fort Rocky Entertainment Zone projects have been announced and re-announced several times. In fact, Fort Rocky was named Jamaica's first entertainment zone in October 2017. The customs duty changes on imports were announced on another stage last November. And new garbage trucks and buses were announced in 2020 to much fanfare and ribbon cutting. Meanwhile, Jamaicans are crying that times are too hard, the cost of living is too high, their wages are too low. Young people are crying out for opportunities to further their education and for better job options. Citizens are crying no to corruption and deception, and yes to transparency and truth. And in terms of broken promises and deception, who can forget the 5% growth in 4 years, an impeachment bill in the first 100 days after 2016, the fixed election dates that were never delivered, and Jamaica's greatest wish, sleeping with our windows and doors open. And there are a few new ones, Madam Speaker, that emerged during the local government elections, like converting Clarkstown into a city and Portmore into Little Miami. Mere pie-in-the-sky ideas masquerading as a vision of national development. We live in a country, Madam Speaker, where there is increasing doubt in the impartiality of our institutions, increasing reports of fear of victimization by Jamaicans not aligned to the government, entrenched apathy with Jamaican nationals losing hope, who feel there's no recourse, no justice, and no point in participating in the political systems or exercising their franchise. Clouds of uncertainty and concern regarding the rights and freedoms of Jamaican citizens on a range of issues from beach access right through to states of emergency. An absence of accountability for wrongdoers aligned to the government. the militarization of the constabulary. All of this is the manifestation of a tendency towards our autocratic rule that I've spoken about year after year, right here in this budget presentation. That is the untenable foundation upon which the country is being run. The main idea of this budget exercise was leveraging economic stability. But that is not something that the other side can claim ownership of. That was a seed that was sown and nurtured by the People's National Party while in government. After the utter chaos brought about by the JLP administration of 2007 to 2011. Let me remind you, since you keep bringing it up, during the 2007 to 2011 period, the JLP government had abandoned the IMF program in a wanton act of fiscal irresponsibility, leaving Jamaica on the edge of a precipice and staring at disaster. When coming to office in 2012, Prime Minister Portia Simpson Miller leveraged her many years of hard-earned political capital and laid it on the line. To lobby the international financial community to give Jamaica another chance. This was only possible because of the sacrifices of the Jamaican people who were willing to walk the walk because they trusted her not to sell them out. That is what saved our country from the ruin that the previous government had brought us to. We pulled the country out of the mire of fiscal irresponsibility. With Dr. Peter Phillips as Finance Minister and Portia Simpson Miller as Prime Minister, the PNP administration of 2012 to 2016 steadfastly prepared the ground in which the tree of fiscal responsibility began to grow in Jamaica. We got the country's public finances back on track. We transformed the tax system. We implemented other critical structural reforms along the journey. Along the journey of getting our national debt under control. And in 2016, the JLP inherited that tree with its roots firmly already in place and already bearing the fruit of fiscal stability. This is the foundation of the 12 years of economic stability that Jamaica has benefited from up to today. So we taught you about fiscal responsibility on which the economic stability is built. In that period, I was tasked with responsibility for delivering the extensive legislation that was required to achieve that durable fiscal stability. A modernized revenue system and the other basic building blocks of economic stability. Yes, the same tree of economic stability you are now shading under.
There's nothing more powerful than you, making your thing happen, really going for it.
We nurtured its early growth. We made sure there could be no turning back. We led the way on fiscal responsibility. And you on the other side, then on this side, mocked us whilst we were planting and nurturing that tree of fiscal responsibility. All you do is pass IMF tests, you said over and over. Do you forget? So don't lecture us on fiscal responsibility and economic stability. No Sankey, no sing so. We took the hard decisions and implemented them. You inherited a situation that we had fixed here in Jamaica. And you have spent 8 years leveraging that hard work that we put in and the fiscal responsibility that we left, and that is the truth. We on this side have no plans to cut down the tree of fiscal responsibility. It is a tree that I helped to plant and nurture with the work I did in that time. But we also, Madam Speaker, we also recognize that 2024 is not 2012, and the challenges and priorities are now different. Economic stability is not sufficient to meet the needs and expectations of the Jamaican people. The people need Jamaica to shift gear to something much better than what is going on now. The people want to see real change. Jamaica now needs a government that can take the country on the road to change. You say you're leveraging stability for all the people, but I must ask you, which people? Workers who are reeling from the high prices that keep going up? Farmers who are struggling in so many challenges? Civil servants, teachers, and doctors who feel disrespected? What are you saying, and what people are feeling just don't match up? Who is really benefiting from the stability that you say you are leveraging? If you look at the 24-25 budget, the picture becomes more clear. Madam Speaker, in his opening budget speech last Tuesday, the minister announced a giveaway of $20,000 for employees and self-employed persons earning up to $3 million who are in the formal tax system. And he gave it the fancy name, reverse tax credit. He said that the objective is to incentivize on-time filing and paying statutory deductions. However, that objective is really questionable, because to qualify for this, he says that you will have to become fully compliant for the 2023 tax year already gone by March 31, 2024, and that deadline is less than a fortnight away. Therefore, as a practical matter, it is most unlikely that anyone who is not already tax compliant will get the benefit. Furthermore, it is wishful thinking that a single payment of $20,000 would induce anyone who is now outside the tax system to take steps to bring themselves into it and start paying taxes. And it applies to persons below the threshold. The truth is that this so-called reverse tax credit smells like a $20,000 giveaway for political advantage as we get ever closer to the next general election. There's also another angle to it. The minister said that for an employee to be entitled to receive this reverse tax credit, his or her employer must have been fully compliant in making the statutory filings and payments for statutory deductions and employer contributions for 2023 by March 2024. Now I must ask the question, is this fair? How is it fair to an employee to deny him or her this little benefit in the event that the employer is not compliant with statutory filings and payments of deductions? Many businesses are now reeling from the increase in interest rates and are facing cash flow difficulties. So many of those employers may be behind in filings and payments of statutory deductions and employer contributions. The employee should not be blamed or penalized for that. Minister, an employer paying under $3 million to an employee, and the employee himself or herself should get this benefit, whatever the tax status of the employer. If you are on the system, you should get the benefit. In your estimate of $11.4 billion for this relief this year, you've assumed that 570,000 persons will be able to access it. So don't deny anyone the benefit on the grounds that their employer is delinquent. To do that would be simply unfair. Jamaica needs thoughtful governance. Absolutely. And that is why we are on the road to change. Madam Speaker, during the recent local government election campaign, the Prime Minister promised that the income tax threshold would be increased in what he said would be 1.5, 2.0. Last September, I had called for an increase of the threshold to $3 million. The purpose being to restore the real value, in real terms, of the 1.5 million that was announced back in 2016, and to provide some buffer for future inflation. The fact is that since 2016, accumulated inflation in Jamaica is over 46% since 2016. And an increase is required to restore the real value of the threshold that was last reset back in 2016. After the Prime Minister's grand election pronouncement of 1.5, 2.0, persons are understandably quite disappointed that the minister has announced an increase of the threshold to only 1.7 million. That's $200,000. What they expected to be 2.0 million ended up being 0.2 million. And that translates to a mere $4,166 per month in benefit in their take-home pay. And Madam Speaker, I am told, I didn't check it myself, but you can check it if you like, that $4,166 can't even buy a bucket of KFC for a family looking to share and have community with family and friends. Madam Speaker, if the minister had, as phase one of restoring the value of the 1.5, even increased the threshold to 2 million, that would give persons an additional $125,000 per year in their pockets, $10,400 per month in their take-home pay. And that would be a more meaningful benefit. And Madam Speaker, it could have been paid for by using the 11.4 billion that has been allocated to the one-time reverse tax credit. In getting to $3 million, as tax inflows continue to grow, the threshold can be adjusted again in the future, in phase two, and maybe even phase three, depending how long it takes. So, Madam Speaker, Jamaica needs caring governance, and that is why we are on the road to change. I want to say something more about taxes. The minister likes to make a song and dance about no new taxes imposed since the last go-round of $30 billion in new taxes, which was imposed in the first 2 years of the JLP government elected in 2016 to pay for the 1.5. Then the promise had been at the time that it would pay for itself, but that wasn't so. They had to impose $30+ billion of taxes to pay for it. However, it is important to recognize that the taxes being collected from the Jamaican people have increased dramatically under this government. Dramatically. Have a look at that table. And you will see in fiscal year 2015-16, which was the last year of the last PNP administration, the tax collected was $411.8 billion, which was 24% of GDP. The above table, this table, shows how much more tax. This table shows how much more tax is being collected under the current JLP administration. Tax collected now has moved from 24% of GDP to 28% of GDP. A much bigger carving of the national pie is now being paid by the Jamaican people in tax under the JLP. Jamaicans are taxed much more under this JLP government. That's just a fact. And if you look over the 4 years, the 4 fiscal years, 21-22 through 24-25, Madam Speaker, and I want you to listen to this, tax collections have increased by $409 billion. That's the increase in taxes over 4 years. 419 billion of additional taxes have been collected from the Jamaican people over the last 4 years.
The member's time for speaking has expired.
That's why you get voted out.
Madam Speaker,
Members,
Madam Speaker, I now
members.
ask Madam Speaker, I now ask that the standing orders be suspended to enable the member to continue his speech to its conclusion.
Question is that the member be allowed to continue his speech to conclusion. Those in favor? Those against? The ayes have it.
So, Madam Speaker, thank you for that. Thank you, colleagues. As I was saying, over the last 4 years, $419 billion of additional taxes have been taken from the Jamaican people. That is an increase of 66%, which is way more, in fact, more than double the accumulated inflation over those 4 years. Over those 4 years, 31% was the accumulated inflation. The tax has gone up by 66%, tax collected. And looking at tax collection on a per capita basis, in other words, looking at tax collection from the perspective of each Jamaican, since this JLP government came to office, they have more than doubled the annual tax take from every man, woman, and child in Jamaica, increasing it by a massive $190,000 per person. And it now totals $342,000 per person at the time of this current budget. They've more than doubled the taxes they're taking from the people. So much for this no new taxes Sankey. It is irrelevant. No new tax types, but much, much more taxes. 28% of GDP in taxes relative to 24 back in 2015-16. And as the recent election shows, who feels it knows it. Madam Speaker, Jamaica really needs honest governance. And that is why we are on the road to change. Madam Speaker, the minister says he's going to take away the protection that our farmers have enjoyed by removing GCT from the importation of raw produce. He says that Jamaica is on the cusp of being blacklisted by the World Trade Organization, the WTO, if we continue to protect our farmers. Well, based on our research, the WTO does not blacklist or unilaterally punish member states for non-compliance. Instead, an aggrieved member state must first enter into consultations with a non-compliant member state to seek changes on the particular measure that they are complaining of, or to win concessions before requesting the establishment of a panel to settle the dispute. The panel will thereafter issue a report, which can subsequently be appealed before the WTO's appellate body. The minister really therefore needs to state whose bidding he's doing by removing this GCT that was in place to protect our farmers. In recent years, the tensions in US-China relations, the Russia-EU sanctions resulting from the war in Ukraine, and so on, have adversely affected the workings of the WTO. For some time now, the WTO has not had a functioning dispute settlement mechanism since the US decided not to appoint members to the appellate body. And furthermore, the recently concluded MC13 meeting of trade ministers in Abu Dhabi, a number of critical issues were left unresolved. Reforms in the dispute settlement mechanism and so on, including subsidies in agriculture and fisheries by developed nations, and other long outstanding issues for the benefit of small and vulnerable economies like Jamaica. In this context, we must question why the minister finds it necessary to proceed down this path instead of entering into negotiations with whichever party is agreed, we don't know who it is, as provided for under the WTO rules. The minister was also vague on the scope of this announced measure. What exactly are the imported raw food items for which GCT will be removed? I note that under the GCT Act, 3rd Schedule, Part 1, Paragraph 6, the category of raw foodstuff is extremely wide and specifically includes fresh fruit, vegetables, ground provisions, legumes, onions, garlic, meat, which is a very wide category, poultry, and fish. The removal of this protection leaves our farmers very exposed to unfair competition from importers who have little risk. We know that the rich countries of the world, North America and Europe, provide massive subsidies to their agricultural sectors, distorting fair competition and giving food imports from those countries an advantage over our producers here in Jamaica. Over the past 15 years, food imports into Jamaica have seen a steady increase, reaching over $1.4 billion in 2022, according to Statin. In contrast, our agricultural exports lagged far behind at a mere $273 million in that year. And this is a trend, and it underscores the vulnerability of local food production. Local farmers already contend with high overhead costs, including GCT and various inputs that they use, farm supplies, which producers in other countries do not face. Jamaican farmers have other disadvantages, including their small scale, relatively speaking, reliance on rainfall rather than irrigation systems for many farmers, and limited access to mechanization and financial resources. In 2022, loans allocated to farming operations amounted to a mere 146.3 million Jamaican dollars. That's all. The removal of GCT on imported foodstuff will worsen this imbalance between locally produced and imported foods. It is likely to adversely impact the sector and the livelihood of farmers, while undermining rural communities, who are the breadbasket of our country. Only last year, we saw how onion farmers in St. Thomas were hurt badly when import permits were granted to importers and flooded the market with foreign onions, leaving our farmers with produce that they could not sell last year. In removing the GCT on the imports of produce, nothing has been put in place to protect our farmers from the wave of imports of produce that will now come into the market without paying GCT. And there's a common theme here, Mr. Speaker. When I was in St. Elizabeth recently, the fishermen were complaining bitterly that they cannot sell their lobster because big players are supplying the market at low prices and squeezing them out. Their MP is the Minister of Agriculture and Fisheries, yet they are suffering. The government is letting them down badly, and it's a crying shame. Mr. Speaker, there's also the critical necessity for transparency in the allocation of these permits for imported foodstuff to ensure that there's proper consideration for local production capacity and to eliminate the possibility for nepotism, cronyism, and other forms of corruption. And we all hear who the major importers are. Jamaica Agricultural Society, the JAS, was apparently not consulted before this measure was announced by the minister, which in itself is an egregious example of arrogant and uncaring governance. We have to ask who benefits from this. Certainly not the farmers. So who? We have consulted with the farming community, and a raft of measures have been developed that can mitigate against what could turn out to be a very serious and prejudicial action if the farmers of Jamaica are to get a fair deal. The ideas have been proposed simultaneously to remove GCT from farm input supplies, including essential planting materials like seeds and farm tools and equipment to incentivize local producers and strengthen their sustainability. We could remove GCT from local food products, such as table eggs, to make them affordable and stimulate demand and push local production. We must enhance transparency, as I've said, in food imports. We can make the grant of import permits subject to parliamentary scrutiny and approval, requiring that import permits must be allocated on an equitable and transparent process, such as a public auction. And Madam Speaker, Mr. Speaker, until protective measures like these are put in place and are working effectively, replace the GCT on import foodstuff with a stamp duty on imported foodstuffs to level the playing field between imported and locally produced food. And we need to discourage over-reliance on food imports. It takes a little care to find solutions, some empathy and some will. Jamaica needs open, prudent governance. And that is why we are on the road to change. Mr. Speaker, the minister announced various tax breaks for the coming fiscal year, totaling $25.12 billion. Many no doubt expect that these tax breaks will be an annual cost to the budget going forward. However, the minister has not provided the country with any clear and sustainable plan to finance these tax breaks in future years. To the contrary, we were told by him last Tuesday that this $25.12 billion, the annual cost of these measures, is to be entirely paid for in the coming fiscal year by a one-off securitization of some receivables. He has not said what those receivables are. And when I asked him about this after his speech, his response to me was, the information is market sensitive. Mr. Speaker, this is totally unacceptable. The country must be told exactly how these tax breaks are to be financed in the coming fiscal year and thereafter. The public may well be asking, what is a securitization of receivables? Simply put, it is a transaction where the government raises money now by selling sources of revenue that will be earned in the future. This means that a future government will not have access to those sources of revenue because they will have been sold now. And this government will have sold them off to fund its budget this year, leaving the cupboard dry. So who is benefiting from this? We want to know. Minister, the current March 15th deadline for filing income taxes and other returns is pretty rough on everyone who has to file their taxes. Getting the past year's accounts audited and then preparing the tax returns all by the 15th March is really too much of a crunch. An April deadline would ease pressure significantly, and it's time for change. Many other countries have later deadlines, and it helps with their budgeting and their financial planning. So why not take a leaf out of their book? It would give taxpayers who file more time to get their taxes right and would improve the accuracy of their tax filings. It also improves compliance by allowing a more reasonable deadline. It would be a step towards a stronger and more stable economy. Mr. Speaker, the minister was on board with this idea back in 2022, but we're now in 2024-25, and he has become very silent about it since then. I think it's high time that we see some action on this, Minister, and I hope that you will see your way to doing it. Mr. Speaker, on several occasions, including in my budget presentations in 2021, in 2022, and in 2023, I called for the total removal of the requirement for guarantors to access a student loan. The data I had seen when I was chairman of the Public Accounts Committee showed that the collection from these guarantors was minimal in the scheme of things. And there was evidence to show that the requirement to provide guarantors made student loans inaccessible to many students, in particular students from low-income families. That is why I repeatedly called for the requirement of guarantors to be abolished overall. I'm therefore happy that the minister has finally heeded that call and removed the requirement of guarantors of student loans for everyone. Mr. Speaker, it is yet another example of how good things happen when this government listens to the opposition. And indeed, it shows how much better things will be when the opposition becomes the government. It reminds me of my call in last year's budget, a year ago, for an increase to US $150 in the duty-free allowance for online shoppers, for which a minister later adopted in part when he announced the increase to $100 US at the JLP conference in November. Mr. Speaker, Jamaica needs change in the current approach to economic development, and that is where I'm going to move to now. In the just completed local government elections, the Prime Minister argued that the people must not vote with their emotions. He said they should pay attention to all the positive macroeconomic indicators that mean things are good. He said they should hold on and stay the course because Jamaica will soon take off. But the people showed with their votes that they are not convinced. They are not convinced because the economic model of this government benefits too few people. Indeed, the people cried out with their ballots that a better way exists and that better must come. Under the current socio-economic model being pursued by this government, inequality of wealth and income will remain entrenched in Jamaican society. Jamaica is 99th in the countries of the world in terms of commitments to reduce inequality, according to Oxfam. In the 2022 World Inequality Index, the wealth gap in Jamaica was shown to be as wide as in Haiti. In Jamaica, the top 1% controlled 20% of national wealth, and the top 10% controls 50% of national wealth. The Jamaica Survey of Living Conditions 2021, which is the most current available to us, says that there has been an upward movement in both poverty and inequality under the JLP government. And it says, and I'll quote, the prevalence of poverty increased to 16.7% from 11% in 2019. And that inequality increased with the Gini coefficient, and that is the standard measurement of inequality, at 0.3991, up from 0.3671 in 2019. So I wonder, where in this economic performance has there been any leveraging for the people? With inflation running hot and the cost of living increasing by 30% since then, the situation, no doubt, the situation remains dire now. In short, the people are feel it, the way your government are deal with it. The minister announced that GDP per capita in Jamaica is now $7,000 US. He didn't mention that GDP per capita data doesn't show inequality. He didn't mention that poverty is 4 times the rate of unemployment in Jamaica. He didn't mention that Trinidad and Tobago, Barbados, and Guyana are all at around $20,000 US per capita compared to Jamaica's $7,000. For Jamaica to move our GDP from 7,000 US, where it is now, to 20,000 US over the next 15 years would require an annual real GDP growth of at least 7% per year. I'm going to repeat that. For Jamaica to get our national GDP per capita from 7,000 US, where it is now, to 20,000, which is where Trinidad, Barbados, and Guyana are, over 15 years, it's going to require an annual real GDP growth rate of at least 7% per annum. Until we start to put things in place to achieve that level of inclusive, sustainable growth, the talk of prosperity is a deception and an illusion. Mr. Speaker, there's a concept called economic complexity, which measures the extent to which knowledge drives high value added economic activity in a country. It's a strong indicator of a country's capacity to achieve higher levels of economic growth. It measures essentially the sophistication of the economy and the linkages within it, using knowledge to drive economic output. There's a chart. I don't know if it can be brought up. There it is. Thank you. Now that chart shows a comparison of 3 countries, and it's taken from the Harvard Economic Complexity Ranking. And it compares economic complexity trends in Jamaica, in the Dominican Republic, and in Costa Rica. And if you look at it, Jamaica is at the bottom on the right. And Jamaica's descent between 2010 and 2021 is indicative of our failure to build a model of socioeconomic development that can transition us from a raw materials and raw services economy to one of a different level of sophistication, producing high value added goods and services. Mr. Speaker, under the current model being pursued by this government, inequality of wealth and income will remain entrenched in Jamaican society for years to come. We must transition Jamaica from a low-wage, low-tech, low-growth economy to one that achieves high levels of inclusive, sustainable growth that can meet the needs and aspirations of our people. This is a clear metric telling us that change is not only required, but urgent. That's right. We on this side are not deceived. We are on the ground where the people are feeling the pressure. Even though this government likes to tell the people to take responsibility for their actions, it is not very good at taking its own advice. Though the world has moved on, they're still stuck in this trickle-down neoliberal economics, where support is given at the top of the economy and people must wait for prosperity to trickle down to them. That model depends on low wages. That model thrives on low levels of education. It pushes people into things like scamming. It pushes people into hustling for a living. It causes hard-working and unemployed people alike to rely on remittances from their family abroad, and it forces people to migrate. If we are exporting our skills, what are we left with? It depends on people being deceived. But we are not deceived, and we are not the deceivers. Mr. Speaker, it is now quite clear that there's nothing in the minister's budget presentation that suggests that this government has a coherent strategy for achieving a turnaround of that chart. As I have said, wild campaign promises like converting Clarkstown into a city are mere pie-in-the-sky ideas masquerading as a vision of national development. I will now present some elements of our comprehensive holistic plan for sustainable, inclusive development of Jamaica and our people. Some of the plans for the next Jamaican government that we will form on the road to change. Mr. Speaker, since I last addressed this honorable House in a budget debate, we have been progressively developing our plans for Jamaica, and they are grounded in our core beliefs of social justice, equality of opportunity and access, and good governance. Last year, in my contribution to this debate, I spoke about some of the prevailing challenges that were at the forefront of the minds of the Jamaican people: constitutional reform and the need for government with integrity were areas that I emphasized. We call upon the government to repair the breach with regard to the expectations of Jamaicans concerning land, education, security for our people, social transformation, health, energy, and food security. We remain true to those core tenets of national development strategy. I was both tactical and practical when I named our new shadow cabinet. I designed a governance structure that is fit for purpose, creating 4 new policy clusters, bringing a solutions-oriented approach to the changes that we need to see in this nation. Then, in preparation for the local government elections, we laid out our agenda for change at the community, divisional, and municipal levels. The people of Jamaica responded positively to change and the change agenda on the 26th of February. That plan, as I've said, is now going to be put in action, and we're putting in place a monitoring and evaluation mechanism to drive that change. Right, Natalie? That's right. At the national level, our policies and programs must be consistent with the core values of our party: social justice, inclusion, transparency, and, as I've said, a commitment to greater equality. We have crafted a raft of practical measures and a national change approach, and it emphasizes communication, care, and culturally sensitive implementation, honesty and openness, accessibility and inclusiveness, new policy approaches, good governance, and engaging and empowering all our people. Change. Today I'm going to share a selection of some of those measures, and they stand on two pillars: the economic model of the next PNP government and our grounding in and commitment to good governance. The time has come for us to center the needs of the people in a transformational economic model. The time has come for broadening the wealth and ownership base of the society to tackle the chronic scourge of inequality. We must do what is required for high levels of inclusive, sustainable growth to meet the needs and aspirations of our people. The emphasis on inclusive and sustainable growth is important. The fruits of economic expansion must be equitably shared across the society, and the investments must be compatible with our natural assets to preserve our environment for the benefit of future generations. Jamaicans are not interested in economic stability that only trickles down into low growth and diminishing prospects. They want to be able to afford an education, get a decent job, or build a thriving business and own a home. And that's why we must transition Jamaica from a low-wage, low-tech, low-growth economy. We have to transition from an excessive dependence on remittances to earnings from high-valued exports of goods and services. We must give persons, people, alternative to unlawful economic activities. Indeed, the structure of our economy must nurture public safety rather than criminality. And everyone must understand that they have a role to play in making a Jamaica that is a nice place to live. This means people must pay their fair share of taxes, and the government must be accountable to the people because it is spending the people's money. Spending must prioritize access to basic needs, giving people an opportunity for entrepreneurialism to thrive, giving people an education from which they can create new ideas and opportunities, and nurture our indigenous talents. The type of transformation that Jamaica needs will require investment in its people and in possibilities for the people. Mr. Speaker, the major impediments to Jamaica achieving high levels of inclusive, sustainable growth include a failing education system and a training system that is not fit for purpose, which contributes, both of those, to Jamaica's low national productivity. High levels of violent crime, high electricity costs that undermine the competitiveness of our economy, and insufficient economic diversification that would increase our resilience to the growing threats from climate-related and other external shocks. Mr. Speaker, none of these challenges can be successfully tackled if we do not address the prevailing failures of governance in the country. Until the systems of governance are accountable, transparent, and participatory, dog nyam we supper. Mr. Speaker, I believe that all of us as Jamaicans are responsible for creating the Jamaica we want to see and establishing a liberty of the Jamaicans we want to be. That is why our focus is social cohesion and empowerment. This portfolio cluster will focus on transformation, productivity, and access by addressing the ways in which health and wellness, social transformation, social protection, gender, young people and civil society, persons with disabilities and other marginalized groups will not only be engaged, but energized and empowered. Human capital development is highest on our list. It is what we mean when we say we put the people first. It is what we say when we believe in people power. And we balance the books while balancing people's lives. Mr. Speaker, the next PNP government is committed to implementing measures to ensure that Jamaica's human capital has the capacities and skills to participate competitively in a high value added economic environment, which can support the required investments that build that environment and deliver high levels of inclusive, sustainable growth. The crisis in education and training must be tackled and overcome if this is to be achieved. We see education in a holistic way. The education system should be socializing our people towards the kind of society we want to live in. 100% literacy and numeracy must be the target for national transformation. And there is food insecurity in Jamaica, so we cannot avoid dealing with children's nutrition. The system must invest in teachers, as well as infrastructure and technology, and in supporting services for parenting. We feel no shame about the fact that the majority of our students speak Jamaican, the Jamaican language first, and we think it should be central to how they learn to speak English and other subjects. As Professor Don Robotham recently put it, we must meet our children where they are and teach English as a foreign language it is to many of them. Though we must prioritize the early childhood and primary school system to raise standards there, especially in basic literacy and numeracy, we also believe in tertiary education. And we also believe that education must be lifelong to address gaps and reskilling at the adult levels. In the areas of education and training, these are some of our proposals. We will make investments in teacher training and in teacher compensation, in infrastructure and technology, and in support services for parenting. We will expand and improve the school feeding program to ensure adequate and proper nutrition. To ensure adequate and proper nutrition and to encourage school attendance. We will prioritize the early childhood and primary school system to raise standards, eliminate the major existing literacy and numeracy deficits, because our goal is for Jamaica to have the best early childhood and primary school system in the hemisphere. We will put emphasis on STEAM education across the education system. We are not just going to focus on a few institutions when the system as a whole is deficient in STEAM education. And we will provide one full scholarship for the first child per family for a university degree. And we will remove taxes from laptops and tablets for students. And ensure that every teacher has a laptop. And for our teachers, we'll provide them with student debt. For our teachers, we will provide them with student debt reductions and motor vehicle concessions, which increase with their years of service in the system. We will provide teachers with enhanced access to National Housing Trust loans and priority in housing allocations in NHT finance schemes. We'll provide teachers with a package deal to be negotiated by government for free internet access as a tool of trade. And for young people, we will incentivize our youth to invest in their education by capping their monthly student loan payments at a reasonable percentage of their actual income. So that in times when the borrower, the student or former student is not working, those payments are deferred and tagged to the back end of their loan without them incurring extra interest or penalties. We will reinvigorate and repurpose HEART to be a major player in a wider project to prepare our workforce for the current and emerging employment opportunities of the 21st century, including by building training partnerships with the private sector. Mr. Speaker, our nation's training capacity must be as relevant and fit for purpose as possible in a rapidly evolving economy that we must build. We will create a series of workforce development training partnerships with the private sector. And the objective is to develop a competitively market-driven approach to training our workforce. This market-driven approach leverages the training capacity of all of the public sector and private tertiary education and training institutions.
Foster and Thrive supports every turn of your wellness journey, beyond sickness and health to a place where you truly prosper. We're Foster and Thrive, and we're with you for life.
We need all hands on deck to transition our economy to high value-added goods and services. Mr. Speaker, HEART will support private sector-led investments in training by matching grants of up to 50% of the cost of any employer-identified third-party delivered training program that improves the performance or well-being of the employer's staff. And this approval would be automatic up to an amount equal to 90% of that employer's and employees' annual contributions to HEART. And if the need is larger, then it can be approved on the basis of some clear, established, and transparent priorities. We will provide incentives to encourage employers to establish internship programs that build the needs of their businesses and industry with course offerings of tertiary and skills training institutions. We will utilize school infrastructure, which is often, when outside of school hours, insufficiently used. We'll use school infrastructure to enhance training both to school children and surrounding communities. We will entrench civics education as a core subject in the national curriculum. It has started, we will entrench it, to equip our students for actual and productive citizenship with an understanding of the Constitution, an understanding of their rights, their responsibilities as citizens, and social skills based on wholesome values and attitudes. We will build, Mr. Speaker, we will build the teachings of the Right Excellent Marcus Mosiah Garvey into the school curriculum at all levels on an age-appropriate basis to encourage self-belief, personal responsibility, and self-actualization in our nation's youth. We will establish a National Research and Development Council, bringing all relevant institutions together from within the state, academia, the private sector, trade unions to develop and monitor and evaluate a national R&D strategy. And we will provide an accelerated write-off for taxes of expenditure on research and development to encourage greater private investment in innovation that ties agriculture to manufacturing, science, technology, and advances the labor force. Mr. Speaker, human capital development is directly linked to citizen security. It is about developing an aware, thoughtful, and thinking society that can access a wide range of opportunities, locally and indeed globally, with not only the skills, but also the values and attitudes that promote national development. Mr. Speaker, the very high levels of violent crime in our country continue to demoralize our nation. It discourages investment. It increases the public cost of medical care, and it reduces our capacity to achieve high levels of inclusive, sustainable economic growth. I have emphasized that we see education and training as a means to reduce the levels of violence and crime in our society. And I'm making the broader point that to make Jamaica a safe country in which to live, work, raise families, and do business, a different approach must be taken to national security. Or as we have started to call it, to citizen security, coupled with a concerted thrust for social transformation. We prefer to think about citizen security because it forces us to think of people's needs. Our people deserve respect. It shows us, for instance, that road safety is a citizen security issue. If roads are potholed and motorists are forced to swerve as a result, all people using the roads are at risk. So it affects security. Street lights don't work. It compromises women's, in particular, sense of security. And if militarization is the way forward, we will see more and more videos of masked policemen with long guns hauling and intimidating citizens. And that's not the Jamaica we want. We cannot build a future and a nation by locking down underserved communities. The better way is to make Jamaica safe for all by a progressive approach to citizen security. And I'm going to share with you some of our proposals for making Jamaica a safe society for us all. We will revitalize the Peace Management Initiative. Through the Peace Management Initiative, we want to build a network in all of the violence-prone communities across the country, rolling out restorative justice, mediation, and other conflict resolution techniques at the community level. We will train and empower at least 500 violence interrupters across Jamaica. We'll partner with the private sector and other stakeholders to expand Project STAR, which they have initiated, and make it into a truly national program, including things like access to training, mentorship, remedial education, and job placements for youth at risk. We will enact legislation that targets known vicious purveyors of criminal violence across Jamaica and brings them to justice, including through a court-supervised process of pre-charge detention that targets persons on whom there's credible intelligence to facilitate building viable cases that can result in a successful prosecution. Due process is critical here, and that is why it must be a court-supervised process. And Mr. Speaker, we will bring much greater focus on reforming the prison system to reduce the high level of recidivism. In other words, people who offend are imprisoned. When they're released, they offend again and come back into prison. That is recidivism. We need to reduce the high level of recidivism, which is very high in Jamaica, some 40%, I believe, by rehabilitating offenders to become productive citizens rather than reoffenders. When they return to society, every Jamaican has an interest in a prison system that rehabilitates prisoners and makes them productive citizens. We're fooling ourselves if we think that we can just ignore that, let the prisons run in the way they currently run, and solve our national security problems. We will provide the police force with the vehicles, equipment, and training that they need to efficiently respond and investigate and prosecute offenders. We will build out the Jamaica Eye system of cameras to enhance citizen security and ensure greater accountability for criminal behavior It is an important part of making Jamaica safe. And we will provide mental health support, including adequate rest to our law enforcement officers to help them cope with the difficulties of their line of work here in Jamaica. And we will partner with non-governmental organizations to support well-designed and sustainable community-based interventions that focus on anger management, parenting skills, conflict resolution, and overall civility, and substantially increase the number of social workers to take on these critical tasks and build social cohesion within communities. This is a balanced approach to dealing with citizen security, and it is essential. Without it, we are not going to get the results that we need. Mr. Speaker, we recognize that crime and other socially negative behaviors in Jamaica emerge from the imbalanced structure of our society. This is why we prioritize social justice and workers' rights as an essential part of the role of government. As a society with a history of oppression of our people, we must be ever mindful of the need to build healthy employment relations. That includes how government treats the civil service. Government must set the example for how all other employers treat workers. And at a most basic level, we will approach all negotiations with the public sector workers with respect, openness, and a spirit of partnership. The government has been boasting about low unemployment, but many of these jobs are below the International Labour Organization standards for decent work. Many young people are frustrated and are no longer looking for a job. Low unemployment exists alongside high underemployment, with hundreds of thousands of Jamaicans of working age staying outside the workforce, unwilling to work for wages that cannot sustain them with a decent quality of life. We see workers across the economy working for years under fixed-term contracts, and the government will not address this structural inequity affecting the labor market. We have a labor market reform report which focuses on productivity improvements, and it has been left in file 13. We need to advance from a minimum wage system to a livable wage system. Tied to increased productivity to be sustainable. The next PNP government will introduce structural reforms that balance the interests of workers and employers to bring about productivity, equity, and decent work. Our government will seek to ensure that the workers of Jamaica are respected and their rights are protected. And I'm going to share some of our proposals with you. As I've said, we will approach all negotiations with the public sector workers and their representatives with respect, openness, and a spirit of partnership. We will enact comprehensive legislation to eliminate abusive contractual arrangements which circumvent employment rights right across the economy. The government is going through a slow and incremental process of eliminating this practice from the public sector. And it was thrust on the government by the ruling of the court, which affected security guards. But that is incrementalism and is not enough. Many workers outside of the government service, the public sector, are affected by this problem. We will ensure equal treatment of all workers, regardless of the legal form of their contracts. We will pursue the establishment of joint industrial councils in those industries where there are high levels of employment, but there's no common standard for working conditions and there's no union representation. The security guard industry, the tourism industry, the global services BPO, those industries are cases in point where a joint industrial council would really move things forward. We'll review the incentives legislation for employee share ownership plans to make it user-friendly and easy to comply with and administer, followed by a promotional exercise to encourage Jamaican firms to establish employee share ownership plans, which align employer and employee interests and create wealth for their workers at all levels, from the bearer right up to the CEO. And I've had personal experience at the consistent empowerment and enrichment that workers can benefit from through employee share ownership plans. We will establish a commission to examine the dire situation now faced by communities in the former sugar areas and to develop a comprehensive plan for the economic revitalization of those areas. And we've seen in the sugar belts across the country where sugar has atrophied with nothing to replace it. And what has in fact replaced it is the scamming on other activities and high levels of violent crime. We need to do something about that. And we will put in place proper and dignified relocation arrangements for the families of former sugar workers. We have seen too many cases where they're not being treated fairly, in Innswood and so on, where they're being moved off the land without any proper arrangements being made to house them. These priority areas will be built out using social transformation and social protection interventions, techniques, and measures linked into health and wellness strategies. They will be informed by gender considerations and directly address the needs of persons with disabilities, with inclusion being a guiding principle. Social cohesion and empowerment drive sustainable economic development. Productivity. Productivity thrives where people feel safe, secure, and motivated. Productivity, in turn, drives diversification and growth, building our existing productive sectors and enabling new ones to emerge in an inclusive and sustainable growth path for Jamaica. Mr. Speaker, we need a sound approach to economic management if we're to achieve sustainable economic development. It requires continuing along the fiscal responsibility path that we have established jointly over the years, and it has to be maintained by bipartisan support. And we are committed to ensuring that the gains that Jamaica has made in stabilizing its public finances are permanently kept for future generations. I spoke to this earlier, and our shadow spokesman of finance dealt with it extensively in his budget presentation last Thursday. Sustainable economic development will require transitioning Jamaica, as I've said, to one where high-value goods and services are delivered to domestic and export markets. And I want to share some practical steps that can be taken in that direction, beginning with food security. Mr. Speaker, the government is not serious about agriculture and food security, and it is reflected in the estimates of expenditure that were tabled. Critical areas are being neglected. Farm roads expenditure has been reduced. Extension services, which provide guidance to farmers, is flat. Technical support is being decreased. And most importantly, research and development only gets a 2.7% increase, which is way below inflation. The allocation for irrigation, which supports the National Irrigation Commission, is also flat, while Essex Valley and Southern Plains projects are coming to an end, having undergone numerous extensions. Examples of areas for growth in agriculture include supporting research and activities like extracting oils and flavors, developing value-added products from our agricultural produce, and capturing economic potential from waste from harvesting. The quality of our produce is world-renowned and is part of our overall creative product in the country. We're also sorely disappointed by the direction that the medicinal and therapeutic ganja industry has been taken since the PNP government decriminalized its use in 2015 and created a platform for a new lawful industry to emerge. Our cannabis sector must be developed in a way that is far more inclusive for small farmers. Who now find themselves marginalized and excluded. That was never the philosophy when we did this. And I'm very disappointed by the way it's played out. We're going to have to give it some special attention when we form government. The next PNP government will be focused on genuinely increasing exports, strengthening food security in Jamaica, expanding irrigation and research capabilities in the agricultural sector. And we're going to brand this the SMART program, Sustainable Management of Agriculture Through Research and Technology, SMART. With the limited land space available in Jamaica and a growing population that we need to feed, we must find the right synergies between increased food production and sustaining the natural environment. Our housing programs will not compromise the most fertile and irrigated lands, as this government has done at Bernard Lodge. There are some proposals under the SMART program that I want to mention. We will manage the sector through increased training of our youth, with a focus on agricultural training institutions such as 4-H clubs and the extension services offered through RADA. We will increase the productivity of our farmers through introduction of improved climate-smart farming systems and technology to drive farming operations. We'll expand and repair the farm road network to enable our farmers to access their farms and transport their produce to market. We'll engage our major private sector players in the poultry and agricultural processing and milk and livestock production to create the enabling environment that they require so they can expand their already significant contribution to the economy. We'll partner with the UWI and other technical institutions to engage in research that will boost productivity. The College of Agricultural Science and Education, CASE, must be given the financial resources to do the necessary research that will assist our farmers to produce at a consistently high quality. And in fact, the next PNP administration intends to upgrade CASE to a university to enhance the focused institutional support required for a thrust to greater food security in the country. We will boost our own research facilities at Bodles and Orange River and Montpelier to provide innovations that our farmers require to grow the sector. We will make the best planting stock, animal genetics and farming systems in animal husbandry and agronomy available to our farmers. We'll increase the use of drones, RFID technology, hydroponic farming systems, solar-operated irrigation pumps, and in-field monitoring of soil fertility to boost our production and increase productivity. And we will strengthen the laws to protect our farmers from agricultural theft, bringing those offenses under the Proceeds of Crime Act regime so that the profits can be taken away from criminals who reap what our farmers sow. Mr. Speaker, our goal is for agriculture and agro-industries to contribute at least 10 to 12% of Jamaica's GDP, transforming rural development, providing sustainable employment across the country, and guaranteeing our nation's food security. This is why we are adamant that our concerns regarding the removal of GCT from imported foods be immediately reviewed, reconsidered, and the initiatives that we proposed earlier be put into action. Mr. Speaker, I now turn to a number of emerging industries and some of our plans for their development. Like our spokesperson on finance explained, energy, broadband, and internet access are all central considerations for advancing inclusive and sustainable economic growth. Jamaica's fixed broadband population penetration of 15% in 2022 ranks Jamaica at the lower end of internet penetration and adoption when compared to other countries in the Caribbean. Our fixed broadband subscription is lower than the Cayman, Trinidad, and Grenada. We will prioritize investments and initiatives to bridge the digital divide. To ensure that all Jamaican citizens have access to affordable and reliable internet services. This will require investment in building a robust digital infrastructure and expanding access to high-speed internet connectivity, a process which has already started and which needs to be accelerated. By achieving digital connectivity right across the country, Jamaica can create a level playing field for persons to access online education, remote work opportunities, and digital services, thereby enabling them to participate fully in an increasingly digital economy. We also intend to expand partnerships with telecoms companies to deploy broadband networks in underserved areas, providing incentives to encourage adoption of digital technologies in low-income households. Mr. Speaker, the emergence of artificial intelligence, AI, as a new frontier of technological advancement is already having a massive global impact on commerce and indeed life in general. And this is only going to intensify in years to come. We're really at the very beginning of the effects of AI on our lives. Jamaica therefore needs to prepare itself for the positive and negative effects of AI technology so we can benefit from its massive potential for greater efficiency and competitiveness and mitigate the serious risks of misrepresentation and fraud that come with AI. The next PNP administration will.
What's the best kind of home security? Customized. Get Vivint.
Arming.
By equipping students with foundational skills in coding, data analysis, and critical thinking, we will cultivate a new generation of AI-savvy individuals who are well prepared for the jobs of the future. We have to embrace the present in a way that will prepare our people for the future. We will also introduce adult education and skills training programs to upskill and reskill the existing workforce so that Jamaican citizens aren't left behind as automation and AI technologies reshape the labor market. And the issue of internet penetration is also tied to the distribution of digital technology. It impacts the growth of the cluster of emerging industries that we have identified for priority attention: global logistics, cultural creative industries, sports, our environmental and ecological heritage, and community tourism. These are industries that we think have tremendous potential. As with agriculture, this government has not demonstrated its seriousness about the development of cultural and creative industries or sports. The absence of a development plan for culture and the creative industries after 8 years and the barely touched national sports policy that we left behind bear witness to this. Mr. Speaker, the One Love phenomenon, now blowing like a natural mystic across the globe, shows us what cultural and creative practitioners have been telling us for years. Nurturing and growing the cultural and creative industries, sports, and their diverse ecosystems is extremely important for economic development and for cultural identity in Jamaica. This requires the funding and deliberate effort to drive these industries, which are two of the fastest growing areas of economic activity in the world. In this year's budget, $234 million is allocated to the Jamaican Screen Development Initiative, and we endorse that. The government has identified 2 entertainment spaces. They say they've identified them. One of them has been identified long ago, and one of them was used for entertainment from long ago. But it's a good start after many years of inaction. We commit that when we are in government, we will prioritize the participatory development of a master plan comprising a comprehensive policy and legislative framework to support and incentivize the cultural and creative industries and sports. The plan will address investment and finance, education and training, infrastructure development for cultural and creative persons, practitioners, and also sports practitioners. Existing infrastructure for the cultural and creative industries and sports are falling apart island-wide. The Trelawney Sports Centre, Independence Park, Catherine Hall, Sabina Park, the Little Theatre, Ward Theatre, Vale Royal, and other existing and potential heritage sites are disintegrating from neglect. How come? Change is sorely needed. Mr. Speaker, in the area of tourism, we are committed to trying to broaden the benefits flowing to our people from the massive investments that have taken place in tourism. Indeed, we're spending $4 billion advertising sun, sea, and sand And we think that the government should direct some of these resources to developing and promoting community tourism, cultural industries, sport, ecotourism, and craft. For example, a round-robin series of reggae arts and cultural festivals across the island at various dates throughout the year would directly boost community incomes as part of our integrated plan. And it can be done through the municipal corporations to encourage community development. In other words, community tourism for community development. And that type of community tourism activity would produce revenue for the local authorities and help them to deliver services at a higher level to their communities. And this approach promotes greater economic inclusion. It's a glimpse of what holistic implementation across these important emerging sectors could look like, promoting sustainable economic development. While the existing enclave model of tourism generates wealth for that sector, it is not sufficiently impacting the communities in proximity to the enclaves. Though we hear the boasts of record tourism arrivals, we hear very little on why it seems not to elevate communities across Jamaica. And Mr. Speaker, at this point, I want to say one commitment that I have, which is in keeping with our seriousness about culture and the creative industries. When we form the next government, I commit to conferring the Order of National Hero on the Honorable Robert Nesta Marley. For his service of a most distinguished nature in advancing Jamaican culture and his global impact as a liberating, inspirational force for oppressed people across the world. I say, time come to recognize the Gang as a true national hero and confer that honor on him accordingly. Mr. Speaker, I now turn to measures to make real our commitment to the development of infrastructure and human amenities. The vexed issue of energy costs in Jamaica needs to be addressed. They are way too high, and they are another structural impediment to economic transformation. We have some proposals to ensure a viable and sustainable electricity system and to bring down electricity costs to consumers and businesses. We'll undertake a massive regularization support drive for electricity connections, including a subsidy to help families meet the costs of rewiring, inspection, and certification. And we will provide these families with solar panels to help them manage their energy costs going forward and build climate sustainability. We will roll out a national energy efficiency, natural lighting, and passive cooling program, financed by local, regional, and international development banks and private risk capital. The objective here is to achieve an average 50% reduction in residential energy consumption and costs with a very short payback of a few years. We'll prioritize achieving our renewable energy target of 33% by 2030. This government has failed to issue regular renewable energy RFPs, requests for proposals. Indeed, they've only issued one in the last 8 years. That is an indictment on their management of the economy. These RFPs generate fee income for the government, and the capital required to implement these wind, solar, hydro, and waste-to-energy projects is privately funded. We intend to issue utility-scale RFPs every 2 to 3 years to reach the renewable energy target. And Mr. Speaker, we will review the tax system affecting the energy sector to ensure that it incentivizes investments in efficiency and cost-reducing replacement and expansion of the sector, in keeping with our policy priorities to reduce Jamaica's carbon footprint. Making real change for our people requires much greater attention to water, roads, and works. The local government elections made this clear. All governance is about prioritization, especially when resources are limited, and they're always limited. What governments prioritize determines the kind of society we're building, and it tells us what the future will look like. We believe that over the next decade, public capital expenditure must prioritize investments to improve the production, distribution, and harvesting of water, and rehabilitating the minor road and farm road networks across Jamaica. These are dominant demands of the people, and the government must answer to the people. The National Water Commission, the NWC, purports to supply 73% of the population with water, which means that over 25% of our population is not served by the public water supply system. And private water companies don't close that gap in communities where the NWC is not providing water. That's what they say. There needs to be a major thrust to build connectivity among the network of pumping stations and other elements that make up Jamaica's water supply system, so that water can be efficiently distributed from where it is abundant to where there's a lack of supply. And that requires achieving a high level of cohesion among the various state agencies that have responsibility for different aspects of the system. And we have to focus on achieving that. It is unacceptable that slightly over $1 billion is slated for water supply projects this year, given the water storage issues that we've been facing over the last several years, and anticipated droughts with climate change, and the constant cries of the people for water. Meanwhile, the NWC has made announcements of a plan to develop 577 acres in Norbrook, a watershed area at that. One really has to wonder about their priorities. We welcome the public-private partnership that was announced, that is, we're told, will supply 15 million gallons a day from St. Catherine to serve the Kingston metropolitan area, Portmore, and Spanish Town, as long as the commercial terms are fairly balanced to protect the public. We don't want a sweetheart deal at the expense of the public. This project is slated to begin in 25-26, i.e. a year out from now, I believe, according to the Public Investment Program. One is left to wonder why it's taking 3 years since the agreement was signed to start the work on such an urgent project. But what of pipe water to the rest of Jamaica? And what of plans to secure our natural water resources across Jamaica in an era of intensifying climate change? I move to roads. The last 3 decades have witnessed significant investment in the development of highways. And that was a good thing. North Coast Highway Project, Highway 2000, the North-South Link, and Southern Coastal Project, and so on. In the meantime, interior roads, community roads, on which most of our people have to drive on a daily basis, are in an appalling condition. Project Spark is an effort to start addressing this problem, but we have serious doubts as to the approach that's being taken, given our negative experience with the constituency allocation for roads in 2022, which many MPs have reported are still yet to come through. The last PNP administration established a secretariat for GEEP with the technical personnel to efficiently drive the infrastructure projects executed under that program and to ensure proper accountability for the expenditure under the program, which was a great success. We commend that model to the government so that we don't want Project Spark to burn out without achieving significant improvement to the minor road network. Mr. Speaker, I move to health and wellness. There are several green papers, audits, and reviews within the Ministry of Health and Wellness that clearly outline the dilapidated state of the public health system. Even without resorting to these sources, there's a travel advisory issued by the U.S. State Department advising of the poor state of our hospitals and the prohibitive costs associated with accessing private health care. And this is borne out by the constant cries of the users of the public health system and the frustration of the healthcare providers themselves, often manifested in industrial unrest and protests. And even now, there are murmurings of unrest in some sectors of the health service. One therefore has to wonder what guides the priorities for expenditure in the annual budget for the Ministry of Health and Wellness. With a capital budget of $11 billion, nearly twice that of education, one would expect clear efforts to decrease inefficiencies, to improve the overall experience of accessing the public health system, and to address the major health threats affecting Jamaicans. However, these major threats of chronic non-communicable diseases such as diabetes, hypertension, heart disease, and cancer have been, to an extent, sidelined in favor of massive spend on infrastructure concentrated in 3 hospitals. The massive cost overrun in the Cornwall Regional Hospital will go down as the greatest project cost variation in the history of Jamaica at a staggering 1,100%. Never before has any Jamaican alive or dead seen a project move from an estimated cost to completion of less than $2 billion and end up costing more than 10 times that amount at over $20 billion. And this figure is expected to rise further as the completion date is pushed farther away. The only person who predicted it accurately was Morris Guy, the member for Central St. Mary. It is telling that no one has been held accountable for this debacle. The Minister of Health has been bemoaning the lack of local expertise in hospital construction, but he's nevertheless decided to begin the construction of 2 new facilities at UHWI and Spanish Town. We wonder what the logic is behind that when the English-speaking Caribbean's largest community of Portmore still doesn't have a public hospital. And when the Western region is still struggling without a fully operational Cornwall Regional Hospital. And when the major parishes are without a facility that has basic diagnostic equipment. And in major urban areas, there's an economically unsound reliance on using private facilities for public patients, transported in scarcely available ambulances. With this budget, users of the public health system will continue to suffer from prolonged waiting times, overcrowded emergency rooms, inadequate hospital beds, and overworked and demotivated staff who can't wait for the next recruiter for a way out. Like the census, immunization rates are well below target, and the maternal mortality rate is at its highest level in over 50 years. The maternal mortality rate in Jamaica is at its highest levels in over 50 years. No budgetary changes to deal with these problems. Mr. Speaker, something is wrong here. I move to housing, land, and sustainable living. Land and shelter remain important national priorities. On the minds of hardworking Jamaicans is the question, will they ever be able to enjoy the security of being able to own a piece of land or a house? Using data from the 2022 Voluntary National Review Report of the 2030 Agenda and the SDGs, we know that in 2019, over 100,000 fewer Jamaicans rented or lived in their own home than in 2007. 100,000 fewer Jamaicans. 30% of households were either living rent-free with the owner's consent, what Jamaicans would call cotching, or they were occupying premises without the legal owner's consent. That represented an increase of 10 percentage points over the preceding decade. If you live in a major urban center, you are most concerned about the fact that the price of housing built under this JLP government is out of reach for most people. Shelter is one of the basic needs of our people. In the Jamaican historical and socio-economic context, it requires a proactive policy by the state to provide affordable housing for our people. The People's National Party understands this. It is what motivated us to develop Portmore, the largest residential community in the English-speaking Caribbean, and so many other major schemes, Harborview, Mona Heights, Frontier Heights, and a plethora of other housing developments across the island. It is why in 1976, the Most Honorable Michael Manley established a National Housing Trust to provide affordable housing for Jamaicans. It is why the Most Honorable P.J. Patterson in the 1990s established a program called Operation Pride to provide land and housing to citizens, which despite its challenges, delivered over 50,000 titled lots for people in Pines of Karachi, Mount Edgecombe, Melrose Mews, Bedworth Gardens, Bel Air, and a host of other communities. And similarly, the Most Honorable Portia Simpson Miller embarked on an initiative to remove barracks housing and provide houses for sugar workers to live in dignity. In stark contrast, this government has built a mere 200 social houses, one dege since 2016, a paltry average of 25 housing units per year. And it presided over the demolition of poor people's houses in Clifton and St. Catherine and sought to evict 65 settled families from their homes in the widest Vale. In truth and in fact, the cost of housing is out of reach to ordinary Jamaicans, with a 2-bedroom unit on the market costing over $20 million, while the NHT only provides up to $9 million to a contributor to purchase a home. The NHT has been financially weakened by the government's continued extraction of $11.4 billion every year to finance the budget of the government since 2016. After the 2013 to 2016 IMF program ended, we had put that in place for 4 years, when we had a mountain of debt to get Jamaica out of, and we had a very high primary surplus target. It was never supposed to be extended. The recent decision to require NHT contributors earning over $31,000 a week to borrow from private financial institutions flows from that extraction of resources for so many years now, since this government came to power. And whereas contributors to NHT have been charged interest rates of 5% by the NHT, private financial institutions are charging around 9% now. And the NHT is having to subsidize those private financial institutions for the difference in those rates. And that's going to further weaken the institution. Jamaica needs change, and we are on the road to change. We recognize that the police, the soldiers, the teachers, the nurses, civil servants, young professionals need access to affordable housing. So that must be the road to change. And some of our proposals include, we will repurpose the NHT to ensure that it focuses on the building of affordable housing. We will end the extraction of $11.4 billion a year from the NHT for the government's budget and put this money into building affordable houses for our people. We will provide targeted and well-designed incentives for developers to get into the construction of affordable housing so that more of our population can afford to acquire a home using their NHT benefits. And we will complete the unfinished Operation Pride schemes so that the residents enjoy the full benefits of what was started for them. And we will launch a new program based on a similar concept, but with a robust and transparent accountability structure to tackle the deep problem of informal settlements across Jamaica and bring dignified housing in organized communities to our citizens. Mr. Speaker, I move to the issue of good governance because it is the second pillar of the road to change, good governance. When it comes to governance, one thing is certain: things cannot be allowed to remain the way they are now. That is why I have identified an entire cluster of portfolios within our own governance structure to address the now desperate area of transparency and accountable governance. And this is where change is truly required. I move to the focus on social justice first. A robust social justice agenda is necessary for achieving high levels of inclusive, sustainable economic growth. If Jamaica is to become a socially cohesive society that moves away from negative behaviors and attitudes that undermine our mission to achieve national greatness. Deepening social justice is an important part of this objective, and I'm going to give you some of our proposals. We will implement a progressive beach access policy to ensure that the public has reasonable access to Jamaica's beaches, as is done in other Caribbean islands that also enjoy a strong tourism industry. Beach access is important for our people's recreation and leisure in a stressful world. This is no small thing, given the levels of violence and stress in this society. We will work with all stakeholders, including communities which have historically used beaches for recreation and fishing, and also tourism interests, to secure appropriate rights of access for the public to be able to enjoy our beaches. And if necessary, we will use legislation to protect the public's interest in having reasonable beach access while protecting the legitimate commercial interests of business owners. This is not an issue which the state can just stand back and leave as is. Time come. While we endorse the raising of the threshold for the income tax on pensions, the truth is that our pensioners are really struggling and much more is needed to be done for them. Administrative changes to facilitate the speedy commencement of pension payments to retired employees is impatient of debate. They have to wait for extended periods before they can start getting their pension. And we have other creative proposals for expanding pension benefits to relieve the suffering of our pensioners, which I will share on another occasion. We will complete the outstanding review of the Domestic Violence Act and move quickly to implement the recommendations arising from that review. And our intention is to establish support centers in every parish to provide safe havens for survivors of domestic violence and other gender-based violence. We will enact legislation to empower the public defender to bring legal proceedings, which he can't currently do, to defend the rights of vulnerable Jamaicans, and expand the scope of the Office of the Public Defender to become a national human rights institution to monitor and report on Jamaica's performance in respecting the rights of our citizens. That institution, I had done all the preparatory work for that as Minister of Justice. 8 years later, nothing has happened. We will complete the long outstanding process of enacting legislation to enable Jamaica to accede to the jurisdiction of the International Criminal Court, which is a missing element in the current accountability framework. I had started that process as well. I don't hear nothing about it. We need to have accountability for the most dire forms of crime that leaders can commit. We will expand the legal aid system in partnership with the legal profession to include constitutional civil matters, so people can get help to access their rights in important areas of their lives, including property matters, estate matters, personal injury cases, and employment matters. We will support the MSMEs, micro, small, medium-sized enterprises, and startups, so that formalizing their businesses is attractive, welcoming, and easy. We have a model for special economic zones of incentives. What about the SME sector? Why shouldn't they get a similar ecosystem of benefits to encourage people to formalize and start businesses? We will do that. We will enact legislation to require the banks to provide a minimum suite of basic financial services to customers without charging fees. And that their cost of doing that will be treated as part of the annual cost of having the privilege of operating a bank and their licensing. And we will enforce minimum service standards to ensure that customers have ready access to ATMs to withdraw and deposit money, especially in underserved areas where banks have been closing branches. Time come to protect our people who are not being served adequately by the banking sector. And we will use the legislation governing ganja to create a special ecosystem for the Rastafari community. And we want to economically empower the Rastafari community. And that is a matter close to my heart as the architect of the PNP's 2015 decriminalization of ganja. There are provisions in the law for regulations to be made to achieve that, and they're not being used. Making change through social justice leads to a serious reconsideration of Jamaica's current place and standing in the world Mr. Speaker, our international policy position centers on the principle of being good neighbors to all while maintaining our sovereignty and independence. That guides our relationship with the global family of nations. We steadfastly maintain the right to exercise independent judgment and make independent decisions based on the principles that we embrace. We will continue to work towards strengthening our relationships with the global south, even as we maintain long-standing relationships with our traditional partners. Our trade with the African continent and its large and rapidly expanding economies remains very modest. The top 5 economies in terms of growth are South Africa, Nigeria, Egypt, Algeria, and Ethiopia. And we have long historical connections with the fast-growing economies of Ghana and Sierra Leone. There are therefore tremendous opportunities for us to build out new trade and investment linkages with Africa. Jamaica needs to stop dithering and ratify the historic $1.5 billion agreement between CARICOM and the African Exim Bank. And we are committed regionalists. So the dire situation in our close neighbor Haiti is of great concern to us. We commit ourselves fully to engagement in the regional efforts associated with that crisis and to reasserting Jamaica's constructive leadership role within CARICOM that has been allowed to atrophy over the past 8 years. A progressive, principled foreign policy delivers real positive change for our people. The Petro-Caribe oil financing arrangement and the San Jose Accord, which financed Portmore, are striking examples of what a progressive, principled foreign policy has done for our people in the past under the People's National Party. And that is what we are committed to locally and globally. Mr. Speaker, change at the national level must focus on good governance. In this modern era of pervasive information sharing and communications, good governance is increasingly essential to maintain the people's trust and confidence in our democracy. Citizens are demanding that their leaders uphold the highest standards of accountability, transparency, and trustworthiness. All the measures that I've outlined for implementation will only be possible if we change the approach to governance that now exists. I'll leave you with the ways, means, quality, and spirit of the change in governance that we commit to. And good governance isn't just a set of ideals. It is the foundation upon which an equitable and just society can be built. The People's National Party has always been committed to fulfilling these ideals, and we will translate these principles into tangible actions that uplift and empower every member of our society. Mr. Speaker, we are in an increasingly low trust environment. Since the JLP government came to office in 2016, no less than 8 ministers have been forced to resign or have been otherwise sanctioned for a range of serious breaches, and Jamaica continues to rank poorly on international corruption indices. The move in 2020 to take away the chairmanship of most parliamentary committees from the opposition has weakened that mechanism of holding government to account. The maneuvers to delay the tabling of reports from the Auditor General and the Integrity Commission remains a contentious matter, especially since the legal opinion on which this delay is purportedly based has been withheld from parliamentarians and the wider public. When the former Speaker was forced to resign as a result of an Integrity Commission investigation, the move to replace her with the wife of the Prime Minister, so that the head of Parliament is now the spouse of the head of government, really does not sit well with the tradition that the Speaker must act independently of the government of the day. The Speaker is intended to be independent and must act independently of the government of the day. That is the tradition. That is the tradition. The failure. Mr. Speaker.
Members.
identify the so-called illicit 6 MPs.
The Prime Minister fire you, both sides. The Prime Minister fire you, both sides. The Prime Minister fire you. The Prime Minister fire you, both sides. Both sides.
The failure to disclose the identity of the so-called illicit 6 MPs who are under investigation by the Integrity Commission for illicit enrichment remains.
Member. Both sides. Both sides. Both sides. Who can continue? At this time. Both sides. Both sides. Both sides. Both sides. Both sides. The Prime Minister fire you, both sides. Both sides. At this time, there is by number. Both sides. I will not continue in this. Some are asking members to be quiet. Thank you. Section 7 of the Standing Orders of the House of Representatives of Jamaica says the quorum of a house and of a committee of the whole house shall consist of 16 members beside the person presiding. If at any time during a sitting of the House objection is validly taken by any member that there is not a quorum present, the person presiding shall direct members to be summoned, and if at the end of 5 minutes a quorum be not present, he shall adjourn the House without question put. If at any time during a sitting of committee of the House and the House object, and I read section 2, subsection 2 of section 7, and as it stands, I am now summoning members to come on the inside of the chamber, and we will wait for the 5 minutes. This honorable house is now adjourned. For a date to be announced.